Two book launches took place at Church House during General Synod in Westminster this week. One was Barefoot Disciple, a book by Stephen Cherry of Durham, with a foreword by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the other was Feast and Fast, Food for Lent and Easter, by Christina Rees, containing many interesting recipes from her own family background. Here's what Dr Rowan Williams says in his foreword to Stephen Cherry's book. If it's true that humility is necessarily something that happens in you when you're not looking, how on earth do we think about it, let alone make the sort of decisions that might help us grow into it? Stephen Cherry's book is a gently effective clearing of the ground. He guides us carefully through the minefields of definition, positive and negative varieties of pride, humility, and the varieties of humiliation, humility and modesty, false and true. And above all, he clarifies the intensely creative character of humility when it is, in his terms, passionate. That is, bravely self-confident, because self-forgetting. Humility indeed happens when we're not looking, and that means that we have to learn where to look if we want to grow into the truth. We must look into the purpose, the mission of God, and allow ourselves to be taken up into the terror and exhilaration of this mystery, so that we forget to protect ourselves. This is the heart of that childlikeness which Stephen identifies with real Christian maturity. But the opportunity for this does not come only in the context of prayer and praise. It develops in moments where I find I have become a stranger to myself, moments when I have lost my bearings and can't see the way forward, the moments when I have to learn something new in order to live. Wisdom, Stephen writes, demands that we take the risk of being overwhelmed. And it is this vulnerable willingness to become a stranger and lose our bearings that's the key to the entry into the world of Jesus Christ. We find ourselves guests of Christ, strangers welcomed into a home, and so learn to exercise hospitality ourselves. In all this, too, we come to understand ourselves more fully as bodily beings, constantly tempted to fantasize ourselves out of the material world. So much of what the Archbishop says applies to all of us. Here, I talk a bit more to Christina about her book.
It's a book about feasting, eating very much, but eating good, wholesome food, and eating it mindfully. And the whole thing is about whatever you do for Lent, and as a Christian, it's really a discipline for all year round. Think mindfully about what you're doing. And yes, there is a chapter on fasting, but that's only for people who feel called to do it and are able to fast, whether it's a meal or maybe just fasting from certain things in life, like fasting from complaining.
Yes, but isn't mindfulness a bit Buddhist for a Christian?
Oh yes, absolutely, because there are lots of spiritual wisdom in all the great traditions, and that's one of the things that many of the traditions have in common, and that is mindfulness, thoughtfulness, taking time out, reflecting on who you are, but ultimately the message of this book is to reflect on who is Jesus Christ for you.
Right. And every Lent I try and give up chocolate, but I think it's about 10 years or 15 even since I succeeded. Is this book going to allow me to carry on eating chocolate while being good at Lent?
Absolutely. Have your chocolate and eat it and enjoy it. But Ruth, you must buy the best chocolate you can afford. It must be fairly traded, and you must think about the people who went out and picked the beans, and enjoy every mouthful and morsel and be grateful for it, and then use your energy to go and run or dance or swim or meditate or whatever. So it's just being present in everything you do and not taking anything for granted.
Last night the Archbishop of Canterbury launched his Lent book, or the book that he's commissioned, and that's all about humility. Where does humility figure in yours?
Humility is one of the greatest Christian virtues, and its converse, a spiritual arrogance, is something we must really forego. And so if people are afflicted with spiritual arrogance, maybe for Lent they could give up that and gain humility for Lent.
Because the Archbishop explained that humility, the root of the word humility, comes from earth, a humus. And, of course, food grows from the earth. So there is a link, isn't there?
Absolutely a link. And you know, all food grows from the earth. We are dependent on planet Earth for everything we eat, whether it's a salad, lettuce, or whether we are people who kill things, Christian. You will find Christ in this book, but you will also, I think, find freedom, I hope, from a false piety and from doing things just to do them. I hope it will help people to find their journey, their unique journey and their unique calling. So every time I cook these things, I think of them, I am connected with them, and it becomes so much more than just making a dish. And so it was a great treat to do, and as anyone who writes knows, you sort of go into a zone just to write it. And the mentality I went into was almost like a fast from other things, and making this a very much a focus for the time I was writing, which was a great treat to focus on it, because I had to live through what I wanted to say. And I think that's where the connectedness came in, is that I suddenly realized I don't really believe that we should have stop-start lives where one bit is separate and then you go into a different mode and, oh, this is this season, so we can do something quite different. And I suddenly thought, well, the feasting and the fasting is both physical, that goes throughout our lives, and there are times where we feast and times when we fast. And also that is the same way spiritually and emotionally. If you're bereaved, you fast from joy for a while. And if something good happens, you can fast from grief and sadness for a while. So many different ways of doing it. But this is a little snatch I wanted to read. I also drew all the illustrations, and they were almost as silly as some of the things I wrote. There are very practical, down-to-earth things, very, very earth things, as well as the more spiritual. But this little snatch of reading is dedicated mainly to my synod friends. It's a section called Sleeping Well. Many of us treat ourselves in a way we would never treat anyone else, not even, perhaps not especially, a beloved pet. When our children are hungry, we feed them. When our dog or cat or budgie is hungry, we feed them. We make sure they have adequate exercise, and we are careful not to push them to exhaustion. We provide them with comfortable beds, and we do not ridicule them for needing to sleep. We would certainly never routinely deprive them of the sleep they need, forcing them to stay awake when they are clearly exhausted. Yet many of us push our bodies in ways that would be considered cruel if we were animals. We override our need for sleep and keep ourselves awake with unhealthy stimulants. Even natural stimulants like coffee, tea, and chocolate become unhealthy if overused. We boast about how late we can stay up working. We joke that sleep is for wimps, but it is clear that's precisely what we think. There's a wonderful verse in the Psalms that addresses this negative tendency, showing us that it is not only part of our contemporary condition. It is vain you get up earlier and put off going to bed, sweating to make a living, for God gives sleep to his beloved. If the only thing you changed this Lent was to make sure you got enough sleep, think of how it might transform how you feel.